The halls of Pierce Industries smelled like stale ambition and dying legacy. I stood quietly at the back of the boardroom as my father, Richard Pierce, wrapped up yet another uninspired quarterly report. The family business, once a titan in industrial manufacturing, was bleeding money, and no one, not my older brother Daniel, not the advisors clinging to their pensions, seemed to know how to stop it. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. I was only invited because I'd created the AI prototype that saved our logistics division 3 years ago, back when I was still naive enough to think merit could earn me a seat at the table, but I never got credit for it. Daniel slapped a few patents in his name. Father called it a group effort, and I was quietly rotated out of the project into a role that felt more like exiled junior innovation liaison, which was just a fancy way of saying, stay in the corner, play with your code, and don't speak when the adults are talking. So I stopped talking. I built my own empire instead, but that's a story for later. Right now, I watched as Daniel proposed another restructuring plan, a doomed attempt to expand into Eastern Europe using outdated supply chain models and gut instinct. It was absurd, but they all nodded. I think we need to double down on legacy, Daniel said proudly. People still trust the Pierce name. I almost laughed. They didn't. Not anymore. Our logistics failures had become meme-worthy on Twitter. Last month, Richard leaned back in his chair. What do you think, Alexander? All heads turned. My voice carried little weight here, but it amused him to pretend. I leaned forward slowly, fingers folded. I think trusting legacy in a digital-first global market is like choosing a horse over a bullet train. The room froze. Daniel chuckled. Always the philosopher. You still chasing that AI nonsense? Not chasing, I said softly. Building. That was the last time I spoke in a Pierce boardroom. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, stark, minimalist, sleek. It was in the same building as the headquarters of Neuronova Systems, a startup no one in my family had ever heard of. They didn't know I'd founded it. They didn't know it had scaled across 3 continents into years, optimizing supply chains with real-time AI analytics. They didn't know we had contracts with half the Fortune 500. They didn't know that their own supplier in Shanghai was already using my platform to undercut their pricing and delivery models. They didn't know Neuronova had just been valued at $1.3 billion after our latest Series C round, led by investors who used to sit at my father's country club. They still thought of me as the quiet kid who liked tech. Perfect. My phone buzzed. Sophia, 12:18 a.m. You sure about this, Alex? It's your family. Me, 12:19 a.m. They stopped being my family when they made me invisible. Sophia was my COO and the only one who knew the full story. She had seen me on the nights I worked until a.m. with no heat in my first apartment, coding and pitching. She helped me run the numbers, study supply trends, and turn Neuronova into something unstoppable. Now it was time to come full circle. The Pierce board was quietly shopping for investors. They needed a $400 million bridge to stay afloat. Publicly, they were pretending everything was fine. Privately, they were bleeding. Neuronova had just created a new shell entity, Black Horizon Holdings. Guess who was about to make a quiet offer? Not out of spite, out of precision, out of a need to reclaim what should have been mine and to show them that the world no longer belonged to men in suits making guesses in polished rooms. It belonged to the ones they underestimated, the ones they dismissed, the ones who built quietly in the shadows, like me. Pierce Industries was more fragile than it looked. Their branding still clung to gold-lettered tradition, thick business cards, a stately marble lobby, legacy employee plaques lining the wall like a museum. But underneath, it was rot. Supply chains were outdated, warehouses inefficient, and the executive team had no clue how to transition into automation, AI, or anything beyond 1999, which was exactly why Black Horizon Holdings, my shell company, was now their lifeline. At precisely 9 a.m. on Monday, their boardroom buzzed with confused tension. Richard Pierce sat at the head of the table, his usual Navy power suit in place, though his eyes looked tired. Daniel was furiously tapping on his iPad, no doubt Googling the name of our shell company. Who the hell is Black Horizon? He whispered to one of the junior VPs. They have a clean investment record, the CFO said hesitantly. Mostly private capital, AI focused, no known scandals. I smirked, watching the live stream from my Neuronova office across town. We'd placed a hidden camera through one of our dummy consultant firms during a tech audit the week prior. Sophia sat beside me, sipping her oat milk latte. They're twitchy, she murmured. Should we up the pressure? No, let them stew. Black Horizon had offered them $400 million in equity investment, enough to keep them afloat. But with one caveat: complete operational control. My family's company would stay alive, but under someone else's rule. Are they serious? Richard thundered. They want to gut the C-suite and install their own team? They think we'll just hand over Pierce Industries like a foreclosure property? Daniel slammed his palm on the table. We don't need them. We can find another backer. We're still Pierce. Silence. They couldn't. They had already been turned down by every legacy investor in their network. The last bank loan had a 12.9% interest rate. They were months from defaulting on overseas contracts. We need this, the CFO finally said, voice quiet. Black Horizon has leverage. If we don't accept, we go under within the year. Richard stared down at the proposal again, jaw clenched. The founders anonymous, he growled. No name, no face. I don't trust that. Of course he didn't, because anonymity was power. My terms were clear. $400 million in capital, 51% operational control, immediate audit and tech upgrade initiative, reassignment of all R&D and innovation branches to Black Horizon's leadership. All they had to do was sign. Back in my office, Sophia leaned forward. Want to add the final cherry on top? I nodded. She tapped a few keys. Within seconds, Daniel's iPad buzzed. A new email. Subject: Ray. Patent discrepancy 2019 AI logistics platform. Attached was a scanned, notarized statement from the original project team, including 2 engineers Daniel had forced out, confirming that I, Alexander Pierce, was the sole creator of the AI prototype that saved the company, and that Daniel had stolen the credit. What is this? He mumbled, blinking at the screen. A second email hit the boardroom, this time to Richard, from a prestigious law firm. A polite notice that patent fraud charges would be pursued unless Pierce Industries responded to our settlement terms. Immediate board restructuring and public acknowledgement. The room erupted in chaos. Back at Norinova, I stood and stretched, calm. That's enough for today, I said. Sophia grinned. Want to show them your face yet? Not yet, I replied. The reveal needs an audience, because the Pierce family legacy didn't just need saving. It needed a reckoning. One they'd never forget, and I was going to give it to them at the upcoming annual Pierce Gala, a charity ball where the city's elite gathered to toast an empire built on my silence. They'd invited me, of course, as a formality, just like always. They had no idea it would be the last event where they stood on that pedestal alone, because this time, the ghost they had erased was coming to claim his crown. The ballroom at the Pierce Foundation's annual gala glittered like it always did. Crystal chandeliers, champagne pyramids, and carefully curated guests who understood the subtle power games embedded into every handshake. This year's theme was Legacy in Motion. How poetic. I arrived fashionably late, dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, hair slicked back, calm in the eye of a storm only I could see coming. No one recognized me at first. 5 years had made me leaner, more composed, sharper. Gone was the eager, overlooked son trailing behind his father. In his place stood something else entirely. Name? The check-in woman asked politely. Alexander Pierce. She blinked, confused, then smiled, uncertain. Of course, Mr. Pierce. Right. This way. Inside, Daniel was already holding court, glass of champagne in hand, boasting to a cluster of business journalists about Pierce Industries' innovative pivot and new private capital partners. I stood near the rear wall, watching him from the shadows. My presence hadn't registered yet. Sophia, in a midnight blue gown, moved through the crowd like a shadow agent, whispering cues to our team. A string quartet played a dramatic rendition of Vivaldi's Winter. Appropriate. At exactly 9:15 p.m., the MC took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a night celebrating innovation, legacy, and the future of Pierce Industries. The usual applause followed. Richard gave a stiff speech about resilience, conveniently skipping over the financial desperation that had nearly sunk the company. Then came the final act. Before we toast the future, the MC said, please welcome a special guest, an investor whose vision has ensured our company's next chapter. Daniel's face twisted. He hadn't approved a public reveal. Richard leaned forward, confused. I wasn't told about this, he whispered to his assistant. I stepped forward. The MC paused, slightly startled, but recovered. Mr. Alexander Pierce. Gasps rippled through the crowd like electricity. Daniel dropped his glass. Shards and champagne pooled at his feet. Richard stood, stunned. You're Black Horizon? I stopped center stage. No, I'm the man you erased. And the man who now owns 51% of Pierce Industries. The silence was immediate, heavy, delicious. For those unfamiliar, I said, microphone in hand, I was once the lead AI developer at Pierce. My early designs are still the foundation of your current logistics platform. But rather than credit or backing, I was told my ideas were too risky, that I was naive. That tradition mattered more than evolution. I looked directly at Daniel. Then I was replaced. People whispered. Cameras clicked. But I didn't disappear. I continued. I built a company from scratch, Neuronova, backed by some of the most advanced AI minds in the world. And when Pierce Industries came begging for help, I gave it. Under one condition: full control. Richard tried to recover. This is unacceptable. You're using emotional blackmail to humiliate us. No, I cut in. I'm giving your company a future, something your pride never could. I turned to the crowd, effective immediately. Pierce Industries will be led by a new operational team, my team. The outdated systems, the bloated leadership, the nepotism, it ends tonight. And as for Daniel, I gestured to Sophia, who handed the board a dossier. His patent theft, verified by legal documentation, will be addressed in court. Daniel lunged forward, red-faced. You're ruining us. No, I said. I'm rebuilding what you tried to bury. Reporters were already tweeting, snapping photos, documenting every stunned expression. It was done. The legacy they clung to had just been reshaped in front of 300 witnesses. I stepped down from the stage, walking calmly through the parted sea of shocked donors and executives. No applause, no smiles, just stunned silence. Sophia joined me near the exit. That was brutal, she whispered. Effective. They needed a clean break, I replied. Now they have it. As we stepped into the night, cameras still flashing behind us, I glanced once more at the gold Pierce Foundation banner fluttering above the entrance. It used to represent a family I longed to be accepted by. Now it was just the shell of a dynasty I had replaced. Next stop, transforming the company into something it had never been before. Honest, innovative, human, and fully mine. The Monday after the gala was chaos, exactly as I planned. Executives quit in waves. Lawyers stormed in with their polished briefcases and outdated strategies. Shareholders panicked, demanding answers. And the media? Oh, they were feasting. Headlines like "Disgraced Heir Ousted by Secret Founder" and "AI Visionary Reclaims Pierce Industries" flooded every business site. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked into the boardroom of Pierce Industries, once my father's temple of tradition, and sat at the head of the table, where I had never been invited before. This time, no one stopped me. Sophia stood at my right, while Marcus Chen, our lead AI systems architect at Neuronova, sat at my left. A few remaining legacy board members filed in, wearing expressions that mixed confusion with barely disguised contempt. Let's begin, I said, calmly opening my laptop. We're going to restructure everything, from product to culture. One of the senior board members, Gerald Klein, scoffed. You may own controlling shares now, Mr. Pierce, but we're not here to destroy what built this company. What built this company, I replied evenly, is exactly what almost killed it. I hit a key, and the large screen behind me lit up with a graph. 5 years of plummeting margins, missed innovation deadlines, and lawsuits, several of which were buried under NDAs. You've buried AI integration proposals for 3 years. You funneled resources into luxury PR campaigns while our supply chain tech built on my early frameworks went completely unmaintained. And worst of all, I turned to Daniel's empty seat. You let personal ego override operational excellence, eh? Few board members shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here for revenge, I continued. I'm here for reinvention. Sophia handed out portfolios labeled Operation Phoenix, our full strategy for transforming Pierce Industries into an AI-driven global logistics leader with decentralized smart hubs, green infrastructure, and real-time adaptive routing. Plans I'd built in secret for years, waiting for this very moment. There's no room for fragile egos, only execution. Gerald raised an eyebrow. And what about the people who've been here since the beginning? You're going to just toss them aside? No, I said. I'm going to evaluate them based on skill, not seniority. Anyone who adapts stays. Anyone who can't walks. We launched within the week. The first move was rebranding, Pierce Global, with the tagline "Driven by Insight, Powered by AI." Then came the restructuring of every regional hub. Under Sophia's leadership, We replaced manual scheduling. Departments with real-time prediction modules using Neuronova's platform. Shipping accuracy increased by 30% in a month. Then came the social good initiative, something my father never considered. We opened apprenticeship programs in underserved communities, brought in young coders through neurodiverse hiring pipelines, and greenlit Pierce Global Labs, an R&D branch focused entirely on ethical AI and logistics. The backlash was immediate. Traditionalist investors pulled out. Blogs accused me of ruining an American legacy. My father gave an interview to Forbes, claiming I was too emotional and ungrateful. But revenue ticked up, customers returned, and most importantly, innovation was no longer a word we faked in PowerPoints, it was in every corner of our operation. Still, the past didn't die quietly. Late one night, I received a visit. Richard Pierce stood in my office, uninvited looking, worn, but no less proud. "I taught you how to be strong," he said quietly. "No," I said, without looking up. "You taught me how to survive. Sophia taught me how to build," he scoffed. "You think this will last? You think investors will follow a man who betrayed his family?" I finally looked at him. "No one betrayed the family, Dad. The family betrayed its future. I just refused to let it die." He stared at me, then turned and walked out without another word. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat alone in the glass-walled office, watching the city breathe beneath me. I wasn't just leading a company now, I was rewriting a legacy, brick by brick, code by code, and the final chapter, that would come soon, the day the Pierce name no longer stood for stubborn pride but for transformation. 6 months later, Pierce Global didn't just recover, it became the most talked about transformation in corporate America. The company that had once clung to outdated supply models was now setting global standards. We launched predictive inventory, routing that slashed warehouse waste by 48%. Our decentralized hubs powered by sustainable energy earned us government contracts across 3 continents. And Sophia's educational pipeline was producing the most agile young minds in logistics tech. I wasn't just running a company anymore, I was leading a movement. But one last thing remained unfinished. Closure.it came in the form of an invitation. A lavish dinner at the Imperial, hosted by the Pierce Foundation, still chaired by my father, Richard. The theme? Honoring the builders of our legacy. I almost laughed when I read the engraved card. Sophia saw it sitting on my desk. "You're not going," she said flatly. "You owe him nothing." "I know," I said, closing the invitation. "But maybe I owe myself the ending." And so, I went. The ballroom glittered with old money and fragile pride. Oil portraits of past Pierces hung along the walls, glaring down like judges from a courtroom. Richard stood at the head of the room, still commanding presence despite the clear shift in power. When he saw me, something unreadable flickered across his face. Surprise? Regret? Maybe just resignation. I sat through the formalities, the stiff applause, the hollow speeches praising tradition and integrity. Then Richard stepped up for the closing remarks. "We built this company from nothing," he said. "Blood, sweat, and vision." My father believed in structure. I believed in order. And even though the world has changed, he glanced at me, we are still Pierces. And that means something. The room applauded. Then, something unexpected happened. He continued, but his tone shifted. "But legacy isn't just about preserving the past. It's also about knowing when to step aside for the future." Gasps rippled across the crowd. "I've asked the board to transfer final oversight of the Pierce Foundation to new leadership. The one who reminded us that innovation demands courage, not comfort." He nodded toward me, to Alexander. The applause was hesitant, some surprised, some reluctant. But Sophia, seated beside me in quiet support, smiled knowingly. When I walked up to the podium, I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. "My name is Alexander Pierce. You've heard about me in headlines, in boardrooms, and maybe in a few family arguments," I said, which drew some polite laughter. "What you haven't heard is this. Legacy means nothing unless it serves the people it was built for. Not just shareholders, not just sons, everyone." I looked out at the audience. We're not just building smarter logistics. We're building equity, access, innovation that moves humanity forward. I stepped back. That was all I needed to say. As I left the stage, I caught Richard watching me, not with pride, not with bitterness, but with a quiet understanding that the torch had passed, whether he liked it or not. Later that night, as Sophia And I stood outside beneath the city lights. She slipped her hand into mine. So, she said, you rewrote the story. No, I said softly. We did. Because in the end, this wasn't just a revenge story. It was a story of reclamation, of love that never wavered, of truth that refused to stay buried, and of a man who was cast out by tradition only to return and become the architect of a new legacy, not for the Pierces, but for the future.